Hello and welcome to another After Effects reproduction in Apple Motion 5. So as you know, I learned how to use Apple Motion by taking After Effects graphics which are available online, and I rebuild them in Motion. And then I share with you what I find out in these walkthroughs. So for this 9th installment, the source graphic comes again from the designer Aliyar Mikayilov, and I put a link to that work in the description so you can go and check out the original graphic. You can see it at about 2 minutes and 10 seconds. Alright, so let's have a look at this finished graphic before we get into our project. So we have this banner which will stretch in from the left, and the titles will arrive and they're masked to produce this dual texture with the stencil and the clean typography which features from the beginning. It's capped by a reproduction of the main graphic, which is masked to reveal and enter from the other direction. Then the lower titles will fade in and arrive from the same direction as the main title. In the layers panel, you can see there's quite a lot going on here. We've organized each main graphical element in the groups. We've got this second reveal, the lower titles, the flourish, and then the typography group, which is giving us the main titles with the stencil and clean effect. Okay, so let's get into the project. Right, so this project is 1920 by 1080, it's 30 frames per second, and it's 8 seconds long. So I'm just beginning with this background group, and sitting in there is this gradient generator with a diagonal gradient from purple through to blue. I'm just trying to keep a similar color profile to the source graphic. Before we start building the banner, you want to make sure your rulers are visible and that guides are visible, and also turn on the show full view area for the time being. So I'm going to grab a guide and drag that out to the 255 mark right there, and then I'm going to add a new group, and I'll call this group Flourish, and I'll grab the line tool, and around about the 0 mark I'll hold shift and drag out a line into the canvas, and I'll rename this guy in all caps as leader. We want this one to be very visible because we will come back to this element to produce a lot of masks in later steps. Right, so in the inspector I'll give it a width of 90 and turn off the start cap and end cap by setting them to none. And make sure you have the shape selected and just pull back the sides to fit between the guide and the canvas. Right, I'll get rid of the guides and turn off show full view area. So with the leader selected and the playhead at the start, come into the inspector, into the shapes panel, and with the last point offset here, set that to 0 and set a keyframe, and then bring your playhead to 2 seconds and bring that last point offset back to 100%. So now in the keyframe editor you should see the curve here. If for some reason the curve has disappeared down out of view, come over here and use this tool here or this tool here, fit visible curves in window, and if it stretches it out too much, just use this tool here to bring the timeline back in. So now with the curve fully visible, drag to select it, right click and select Bezier for the interpolation so that we have access to the handles, and I'm going to break the tangent on each handle so we can manipulate them independently of the other one. Now, the curve here, what we want, we have now an ease in and ease out situation, but we want that to be more dramatic. So I'm going to drag this handle this way, and this handle this way. So the thing is with the curves, it still takes me a long time to get things exactly right, and if I try to do that now, I would bore you to tears. But what you're looking at here is the general idea. When you finish the project, if you want to go and grab that source graphic from the link, and then you can play with the curve to get it even more exact. But this is generally what we want to reproduce the After Effects graphic. We now have the line entering slowly, leaping into a stretch, and then coming to rest. And this is our starting point. So grab the leader shape in the layers panel and duplicate that. I'm going to rename it as mask, and so we can be sure about what's happening, I'll give it another color. So now our new element is just sitting on top of the banner line there. But we want it to come in later, so I'll move my playhead to 5 frames, and I will hold shift and left bracket on the keyboard to shift the in point of that element to the 5th frame. So now you can see that the second line, which is exactly the same curve, exactly the same shape, but it's just like a doppelganger, which will now come in 5 frames later than our leader line. And now we can use that to mask out the leader line. But first of all, we want to come to the inspector and increase the width to 100% so that it's slightly wider and we don't get any ghostly lines around our mask. So I'll grab that leader shape, right click, add image mask, and drop in a mask there as the source, and set the blend mode to subtract. So now we have the first element of our banner completed. So our next step then is to complete the banner, which will feature the titles. So I'm going to add a new group, or 3 new groups. I'm going to call this group Follow, this group Lead. I'll grab those 2 and drag them into this group, and I'll call this group here Typography. So if you've seen my other reproductions, then you will recognize that this is how I build the dual textured text with the stencil and the clean typography working together. So let's come back into the flourish group, grab that leader element there, duplicate it, drag it up into the lead group. I'm going to rename this just as lead stencil, and get rid of that image mask. So now this element is sitting on top of everything else. So again, we want to offset that. But first, let's give it another color. Going to give it this blue color. And bring your playhead to the 8th frame and use that shift left bracket shortcut to offset the endpoint. Okay, so now we have this space here for the typography effects to show themselves. but we want this line here to take a little bit more time in its animation. So bring the playhead to 2 seconds 10 frames and grab that keyframe point and just pull it forward to the playhead. So now we have a little bit more space for the typography elements to do their stuff. Okay, so let's add the titles. With the lead group selected, grab the text tool and let's add the main title. So with caps on, I'll come into the inspector and set the font to 60. I'll center the alignment and set the tracking to 20. And now I will click into this text and select just the last word there and set that to heavy caps. And in the properties, just going to drag it to sit in the middle there without playing around with the anchor point. So we want this title to come in at 1 second and 5 frames. So let's get our playhead there. Make sure that it's selected in the layers panel and use I on your keyboard to trim it. And now we can set the keyframe to come into the properties, and for the X position we want this set to, with the playhead at 1 second and 5 frames, we want the X position to be at 260. So set a keyframe there, and now bring the playhead to 3 seconds 15 frames and set the X position to -23. So you should be looking at the line finishing right after the A, and the P is sitting on the other side of it there. Okay, so now we have our curve that we want to play with. So drag to select and break each tangent on the handles, and I'm going to pull this chap down to have the text rush in and then slow down gently. Let's see how this looks. Okay, maybe even a bit faster than that. Okay. So now it's time to start with the stencil effect. Grab in the lead group, grab that lead stencil line, right click, add image mask, add our title text element as the source, and set the blend mode to subtract. Okay, that's all good. So the next step is to create the mirror image of this title, but with the clean type. So we start by grabbing the title element itself, duplicate that, drag that into the follow group, and you can turn it on. Then grab the lead stencil line, duplicate that, drag that copy into the follow group. I'm going to rename that as follow clean type and delete that image mask. I'll rename this title as clean and grab the follow group, right click, add image mask, and use the follow clean type line as the source and set the blend mode to subtract. But now we want the word graphic here to be masked out from this point. So we're going to come back to the flourish group and grab this original line that we made, the leader, duplicate it, drag it into the follow group. I'm going to rename this as the clean type mask, delete the image mask. Now grab that clean version of our title, right click, add an image mask, and drag this chap in as the source. Right, so there's just one more step to finish up the main banner element, and I'm going to add a new group, and I'll call that group reveal, and come into the typography group, into the follow group, and grab that clean version of the main title, duplicate that, drag it into the reveal group. I'll rename it as reveal text and delete that image mask. Then I'll come into the inspector and get rid of the first two words, and I'll come into the properties and reset the X position there. Right, so we want this element to begin animating at 1 second and 10 frames. So I'll move my playhead there, and I'll use I on the keyboard to trim to there. I'll come into the properties and set an X position value of -10 and set a keyframe. And then I'll come to 3 seconds and 15 frames and set the X position at 264. So it should sit neatly over the stenciled version in the layer below. In the keyframe editor, I'm going to play with the curve so that it rushes in and then settles. Okay, so something like this. Okay, maybe even faster. Alright, so now I just want the Word to start to reveal wherever this point is with the main banner. So we're going to achieve that by coming back to that original line in our flourish group, duplicate that, drag it into the reveal group, delete the image mask. Just going to rename that as the reveal mask. Now I'll grab the reveal text, right click, add image mask, and drag that in as the source, and set the blend mode to subtract. So now our main banner element is completed and we can get into the lower titles. So let's make a group for the titles. Just call this lower titles, and I'll grab the text tool and with all caps lower title line. By the way, the font that I'm using here is the same for my last walkthrough. It's Unisans regular and Unisans heavy, and I put a link in the description. If you follow that link, you will get to the Font Fabric website, and if you scroll down on that web page, you should see an option at the bottom to download the heavy caps version of this font and italics and regular version for free, which is pretty cool. Right then, so back to the titles. I want the font size at 38 and the tracking at 20. We don't need to center this text alignment. I'll come into the properties and set the Y position value at -100, and I'm going to move the playhead to 1 second and 18 frames and use the I hotkey on my keyboard to trim the title element there, and I'll set a keyframe here at X position 4 and then bring the playhead to 3 seconds 15 frames and set the X position value at -179. So that should match up with the line. Not quite, so I'm just going to turn my guides back on and tweak that X position value. With the playhead at 3 seconds 15, I'll just drag it over a little bit more. Okay, so I now want to add a fade in. So I'll grab that title, grab basic motion, fade in, fade out, and just in keeping with the After Effects graphic that I'm trying to reproduce, it's quite a long fade. So I'm going to set that to 40 frames. And now I want to come in to the keyframe editor. Grab this curve. Give these titles a faster entry in. So they rush in and slow down. Okay then, so now I'm going to duplicate that title, and I'll command left bracket to drop it under, and I'm going to come into the inspector and change that to regular and drop the last word off. So now it just says lower title. And I'll select that, come into the properties and change the Y position to -155. And I'll increase the tracking to 20. To 40, and drop the font size down maybe to 36. So I want this last title to come in at 1 second 18 frames, so move the playhead there and hit I on the keyboard to trim it. And I want the exposition keyframed here at -80. And then come to 3 seconds and 15. So I've got that around the wrong way. At 1 second and 18 frames, we want the exposition to be 300. And then at 3 seconds and 15 frames, we have the exposition at -80, and let's just adjust that so that it lines up well. Alright, I'll just get rid of the guides. And let's see what we have. Alright, I want that lower title line to come in much faster. I'm going to grab the curve here and see what we can do. Okay, I think that's more like it. Let's wrap things up now. We want to animate this title graphic out now, so bring your playhead to 4 seconds. Close up all the groups in the layers panel, and I'm going to add a new group to the project and just going to call this Animating, and I'll select every group except for the background group and drag that in to the Animating group. And with the Animating group selected, I'm going to hit O on the keyboard a few times to trim every element in that group to the 4 second mark there. And so now to create the clone, I'm going to right click on that group and select Make Clone Layer, and make sure that clone layer is selected. Use the Shift left bracket shortcut to shift that clone layer to begin where the Animating group finishes, and come into the inspector in properties and timing. If you can't see the timing options, just click show and set it to reverse. Okay, now I'll switch on the motion blur and run a RAM preview. I think because I'm screen recording, the frame rate's still going to drop quite a lot. But here is the 9th After Effects title graphic reproduction. I hope that this was helpful for you for your future motion projects, Final Cut Pro 10 projects. Thanks for watching.